The backlog in DNA testing in South Africa is being reduced, albeit behind schedule. The South African Police Service missed an October target to clear the backlog. Now, according to the latest update, it's around 64,000. In the Western Cape, at the end of August, the backlog was more than 25,000 tests at the SAPS Forensic Science Laboratory. By the end of November, that had been reduced to around 15,000. To discuss, we're joined by the Western Cape Provincial MEC of Community Safety and Police Oversight, Reagen Allen. MEC, thank you for being with us. So things are looking better, but you're still concerned about the backlog.
Thank you so much for bringing us into this particular conversation. The efforts that have been made in order to get us to this particular stage, where it is now 15,000 in a backlog, is encouraging, but we definitely know we have a long way to go. We have so many of our victims that are still suffering secondary victimization due to samples not landing up at court and perpetrators ultimately walking free. So it is an ongoing oversight that we have done in this regard, and we have seen since 2019 and even in 2021 when I visited the lab in this regard. So I'm looking forward to actually going back in the end of December to have another look in terms of what the current backlog is, because there was an undertaking given that by the end of this calendar year, we will eradicate the entire backlog in the Western Cape.
Tell us more about the consequences, because it has meant that the victims of crime, gender-based violence, people who've witnessed a murder, they have to wait for justice. Sometimes the cases are dropped. Sometimes people are behind bars and they have to wait without being found guilty or not. Is there a sense of how serious this has been? You can only talk about your province, maybe focusing on the Western Cape.
It has been a huge problem. We have seen, like you have rightly outlined, it's not merely with regard to victims, but also those that are awaiting trial. And it is a major issue because we have a unit that also monitors various court cases. And in our court watching brief unit, we actually saw how a number of those cases that we have monitored was ultimately struck off the court roll, meaning that there is no justice for that particular survivor, for that particular victim. We then intervene to ensure that that particular matter is re-enrolled onto the court roll so that justice can be served. But it has severe repercussions, and one particular court watching brief that I've read, where it was one rape case that was postponed for more than 11 times. More than 11 times, secondary victimization. That particular victim would have to be in court every month, awaiting justice, awaiting an outcome, up until it was eventually struck off the court roll. So it has serious repercussions, and we are wanting to actually see the entire backlog being eradicated so that the wheels of justice can actually turn a little slower in terms of the gender-based violence cases that we are seeing.
Yeah, I mean, how disruptive to people's lives, especially if they're hoping for some serious justice after something terrible happened. You've suggested in your latest release that you could do better as a province if this wasn't with the SAPS laboratory. Why do you think you could do better?
We have showed consistently that on every metric where we are governing in the Western Cape, that we are outperforming other provinces. We have also seen with our data-led and evidence approach, where we have deployed lead officers into our priority stations. We have a number of priority stations where we have seen a reduction in the SAPS members. We have then gone outside of our mandate to put budget aside to put lead officers, law enforcement officers in those communities. And those areas, we are seeing a reduction in the murder rate consistently. Nyanga is no longer the murder capital of our country. We have seen reductions in Mitchell's Plain, all the way to Khayelitsha, all the way to Gugulethu. So we are seeing those reductions being more scientific in policing, being more direct in policing. But we have seen at the national level where SAPS have been eroded. If we consider 10 years ago, we had more SAPS members 10 years ago than what we have now. We have seen a steady disruption and decline of the entire criminal justice system. So we would want policing to be closer to the people and not sit at the national level, so that we are able to have a more meaningful role in the management of the South African Police Service, because as we are sitting now, we have this core oversight mandate, and I've been very clear that the oversight must lead to better service delivery that we are seeing from the SAPS. And we are making strides in that regard. But should policing be devolved? Should it be under a provincial government, being closer to the people? It makes sense. It's a call that is resonating across our province. CPF's Neighbourhood Watch members, it makes so much sense to have it closer to the people. Many first world countries have policing closer to the people and not at one national level.
MEC, I'm glad you brought up the crime stats, because I remember our last conversation was about the efforts that you've outlined to reduce crime in hotspots in the Western Cape. But the crime stats that came out, and you're right, maybe some drops, but I mean, these areas were still way up there. If you look at the general murder rate, the Eastern Cape is the highest, KwaZulu-Natal the next, Western Cape coming in third. But looking at the crime stats that came out after that chat we had, I mean, how much of a difference are all these efforts really making?
We have seen consistently in the last quarter, there was where murder have increased. We actually saw a 3.9% reduction in the LEAP areas. And we can only do so much with a limited budget. And we have identified priority areas so that we can actually build the evidence on policing and take it into those precincts where it is needed. We have consistently talked about the skewed allocations, where some of our precincts, our murder hotspots, are under-resourced, and we have now stepped up in that regard. Deborah, I fully am aware that we are seeing that there is still various areas that would need intervention, need additional resourcing, but from where we are sitting, we feel fairly confident. We are making strides, and the data and the numbers and the crime stats is actually showing that we are making strides in particular areas. But obviously, we have a long way to go. It is something that we are continuing to push, continuing to strive towards, because murder and GBV, there's a number of crime categories that is just out of control. And I was speaking to a number of safety stakeholders, and I told them the last quarter, the Western Cape had an increase, and it was the lowest increase across our country. And I would never feel comfortable to say that it is the lowest increase across our entire country, because we would want to see the murder rate coming down, GBV coming down. That steps to be under the Western Cape government, closer to the people, and we will ultimately see greater successes.
All right, thank you very much. Provincial MEC of Community Safety and Police Oversight, Reagen Allen.